From my experience as an adjudicator, clinician, consultant, I would have to say that probably 80 to 90% of public school orchestras do not play in tune. It sounds like I'm being pretty harsh, and maybe I am being harsh, but I want to get into the reasons for why they're out of tune and how to get your orchestra to play in tune. Because I think a lot of times the students can't hear that they're out of tune, and I think their directors can't hear that they're out of tune. And I'm not saying this to try to put anybody down or discourage anybody. That's not my goal here. My goal here is to really understand what's going on, the mechanics of it, and see if there are solutions to our tuning problems. So before you click out, before you downvote, just hear me out on this stuff, because I'm not insulting anybody's musicianship or anything like that. It's just you get really used to hearing out of tune sounds, and before too long you get just very comfortable with the poor intonation. It doesn't sound as offensive to you anymore, especially if you teach younger students. You just let it go and it just doesn't sound out of tune anymore. So how do we recalibrate the ear? How do we calibrate your students' ears so that the level of intonation comes up and we can start hearing in-tune pitches all the time, and when something is out of tune, it's something that's abnormal rather than something that's normal. I'd also like to talk about the effect of bad tuning on other areas of musicianship. For instance, tuning can affect your dynamics, and those of you who are doing full orchestra, and sometimes I've played in full orchestras where the conductor tends to be more of a traffic cop, and they're always telling the brass to be quiet, and they're trying to bring out the strings all the time. And maybe the problem isn't that the low brass players are playing too loud all the time. I mean, sometimes it is, but sometimes it's just because the tuning quality isn't quite there in the strings, and so those pitches are not going to sound as loud. And I'll explain why that is later. We also want to make sure that we address the hierarchy of techniques, and tuning is fairly high up on the hierarchy. So if our orchestra is not playing with good tone, and if we don't have those good core values, we don't really want to mess with tuning yet. We have other stuff to accomplish first. And especially with the values, if the things that I'm talking about are just going to bore students to death if you try some of these exercises, if they don't know the why of why they're doing it in the first place, or why they're in the orchestra in the first place. What is that getting them in the long run? If that question hasn't been answered, if that's not ingrained to them, they're definitely not going to put up with sitting there trying to tune a chord for 5 minutes. They're going to tune out. They're going to say, this isn't for me. They're going to be bored and they're going to quit. And that's really going to affect your retention. So we've got to catch 22 in that situation if our values aren't lined up, because what happens is if your orchestra's out of tune, well, then you're not going to get the results you want at contests. And if you're trying to get your orchestra to play in tune, if they don't have those values set up, they're going to quit. So you have retention problems either way, and that's not good. So definitely check out those videos first, and then come back and we'll work on this tuning stuff later once you've addressed the foundation of the hierarchy, and then the tone, which includes a lot of technique and setup. So I borrowed this book from a good friend of mine who is a cellist, and it's called Cello Mind. It's a fantastic book, and the target audience, I think, is for advanced cellists that are looking to make a career out of playing the cello. And the first 100+ pages of this book is dedicated entirely to tuning. And there's a lot of fascinating information here, and I love to nerd out and read this kind of stuff. It's very interesting, and it really just opens up your mind to what tuning actually is as far as physics goes, and lining up your tuning with the physical world. And this is a challenge for me as a director, because whenever I get excited about something and I see cool diagrams and I see all this stuff and I'm like, oh wow, guess what? Tuning is logarithmic, it's not linear, even though, you know, my tuner, everything is lining up on, you know, it looks linear to me, but it's actually logarithmic. That's cool. I want to show this to my students. And, you know, you get all evangelical and you start preaching the gospel of cello mind to your students, and they just tune out. They don't want to hear it. So for us, it's good to know we can dissect the different types of tuning, whether it's just intonation, fixed intonation, well-tempered intonation, Pythagorean intonation, syntonic intonation, digimus intonation, so on. We can really explore all these systems and see what's going on here. But ultimately, it's about being able to hear pitches in tune and take what we know from physics and turn it into a real world situation where it sounds in tune. Yes, absolutely, tuning is physical. There are a lot of physical elements to tuning, but our perception of tuning is cultural. And it's important that we understand the difference between culture and ethnicity, or else I could get into a lot of trouble here in this video. So the culture are behaviors and habits that we do as a group. And so what is in tune to you, that is a construct of what that particular ensemble's culture is in regards to tuning. So again, has nothing to do with ethnicity, nothing to do with race. It's all about that group and their teacher's perception of tuning. That's what I mean by tuning is a cultural phenomenon. We also have to understand how things like vibrato influence tuning, because when we vibrate the string, it does affect the pitch. So are we tuning notes that are sense of vibrato, straight tone, or are we tuning notes that are being vibrated, and the rate of vibrato also affects the tuning? That's another physical element that can affect our perception of the pitch as well. Later on, I'm going to do a whole series on vibrato, but we're not there yet in this sequence. We're not up to the top of the hierarchy. Right now, we're just working on basic pitch. And I think one of the reasons why this book, Cello Mind, talks about pitch in such great detail is because in most auditions, even at that level, 90% of the players are eliminated based on faulty pitch and faulty rhythm. And so that's why the first 100 pages are spent on learning how to play in tune, because that's what's going to get you to win an audition. There are other factors involved with tuning that are physical, like maybe your orchestra's playing with an organ, or maybe your orchestra's playing with a piano or something that's, you're not going to get out the tuning wrenches and start, adjusting. You have to be practical with it. So maybe you're tuning to an instrument and you have to switch your temperament. So in the next video, we're going to talk about the cultural side of tuning. And again, we're talking about the culture as a noun, not a verb. We're not talking about a bacterial culture. We're talking about our perception of tuning. And also check out Cello Mind. It's a fantastic book. If you're a geek like me and you just really want to dig into this stuff, it is well worth the money and your time to read it. I'm not even a cellist, and I got so much out of this book. It's amazing.